The medium of manga historically has not exactly been known for its flattering and nuanced depictions of black men and women. If the images do not invoke the barbaric caricatures of the early 19th century minstrel shows, then they often embody the one-note stereotypes of early 90s gangster rap culture, or we play the role of impossibly muscled athletic brute that serves as a force of intimidation or comedic relief. I try to remember that this less than stellar representation is typically not from a place of maliciousness, but rather the common cultural exports of what black people and black culture were from the West, with Japan being as thoroughly homogenous as it is in its racial makeup, especially in the 80s and 90s when these depictions tended to be especially horrendous. A large portion of Japanese men and women would have never seen a black person in real life, let alone have known them closely and well enough to debunk the stereotypical myths being broadcast to them from Western culture. I would like to make it clear my belief that Japan's homogeneous nature does not justify this horrifically common pattern of obscene black representation. While cultural differences undoubtedly play a role in what is normalized from society to society, racism and ignorance is still that, no matter where the community may be located. I'm not saying that I think Japan should be beholden to Western cultural ideals because our way is the only correct way of doing things. Not at all. Japan is a different society with its own unique customs and social norms that are 100% valid and don't need to be approved by Westerners before being deemed so. But just like any society, Japan is not a utopia, and it certainly has social aspects within the culture worthy of criticism, with perceptions and treatment of ethnic minorities certainly being one of them. Ultimately, the purpose of this video is not to bash Japan and the anime or manga industry, or to do anything as lofty as affect social change in society that I'm not even a part of. My only goal is to shine a light on the dissonance that can often be felt from being a fan of a medium that doesn't always treat people that look like you with respect, and give credit to a story that handles this representation better than most other works I've seen in the industry. As much as we hate to admit it, media representation matters, and the messages and stories that we receive from our news outlets shape the cultural zeitgeist and have an impact on our perceptions, both explicitly and implicitly. It is heartening to see that as time has continued forward, it's getting easier and easier to find positive depictions of black men and women in anime and manga as characters elevated beyond the stereotypes found in Japanese fiction in the 80s and 90s. Today I want to talk to you all about a little manga that I feel is truly special, not only for its nuanced depictions of black culture in a particularly tumultuous time in American history, but for its captivating writing, complex characters, and overall artistic merit that makes it one of the most interesting narratives I've had the pleasure to come across. Let's explore Akira Hiramoto's Me and the Devil Blues. Me and the Devil Blues tells the story of RJ, a young man growing up in the Mississippi Delta in 1929 with a dream of becoming a bluesman. RJ is a farmer, and despite the practice that he puts in, he has no talent for the guitar. One night, while spending time at the local juke joint, he hears a legend that if you take your guitar to a crossroads during the middle of the night, the devil will appear. The legend says he'll take your instrument, play a song, and hand it back to you. Afterwards, you'll become a full-fledged blues musician, but every negotiation has a cost, and in this case, it's your soul. For my mileage, this setup is already captivating enough, but the narrative becomes even more engrossing when you realize that the entire graphic novel is based on the real-life story of the blues musician Robert Johnson. Although he went largely underappreciated in his era while alive, Robert Johnson left a legacy that continued to impact the world of music long after his passing. Eric Clapton and his band Cream's signature song was a cover of Robert Johnson's Crossroads. Johnson's chilling lyrics and masterful guitar licks heavily influenced the formation of Chicago blues sound, which has influenced an innumerable number of musicians, including the likes of Chuck Berry, the Beatles, and the Rolling Stones. Johnson's vocal performances and lyrics are said to have stuck with people because of their heartfelt, secular, and melancholic nature, often invoking images of the devil, alcohol, long working hours, and the pervasive sense of pain that comes not only living as a black man in the 1920s, but the suffering that is inherent in human nature universally. Just as interesting as Johnson's influence on music culture are the details, or lack thereof, regarding his personal life. Robert Johnson is a mysterious figure, with little being concretely known about the details of his 27 years on Earth. Johnson is believed to have lived a relatively nondescript life of a sharecropper in his youth. It is during this time Johnson is said to have learned his love for the blues through his exposure to the music from those he spent time around. Then around the age of 16 to 18, Johnson is said to have married a woman named Virginia Travis, who died while attempting to give birth to their first child. In reports made by surviving relatives of Virginia, they stated that her and their child's death were divine punishment for Johnson's choice to sing the evil, secular music he enjoyed, stating he sold his soul to the devil. It is after Virginia's death that many details of Johnson's life grow mysterious and hazy. Legendary blues musician Son House recalls seeing a young Johnson playing a harmonica fairly competently, but reported him as being an embarrassingly bad guitarist. It was then reported that Johnson left the Robinsonville area to Martinsville, near where he was born, where he perfected the guitar stylings of Ike Zimmerman, who was rumored as having learned to play guitar by going to graveyards in the middle of the night and practicing amongst the dead. The next time Johnson found his way back into Robinsonville, those around him said that in such a short time, he seemingly mastered a guitar technique of his own with his unnaturally long fingers and played in a way that was hard to believe it was even the same person. Johnson is said to have the ability to pick up and play songs flawlessly after only hearing them one time, and often would play these well-known pop standards of the time, along with his own dark and atmospheric compositions. Son House was later interviewed and asked about the miraculous transformation of Johnson's guitar technique, and all but affirmed his belief that it had to be the work of the devil himself. After acquiring his supernatural guitar abilities, Johnson is said to have spent the rest of his brief years on Earth traveling from place to place, sharing his devil blues with the world. Johnson is said to have rarely ever stayed in one place for very long, staying with friends and female companions in the towns that he would visit. Johnson is said to have never married again following the passing of his first wife, Virginia, but made a number of long-term female friends and would stay in the homes of whatever woman he was able to seduce following his performances. By the few that knew him, Johnson was reported as being a pleasant but peculiar man, one that was extremely private and tended to go his own way. Few that knew Johnson also stated that he did not seem to be swayed by monetary gain as other men, and it would be nothing for him to pick up and leave while money was coming in from all directions during a successful set. Many characterized him as an indecipherable figure. Johnson's death was just as mysterious as his life, with there being a significant number of varying accounts about how Johnson passed away in his late 20s. There are some reports that Johnson passed away from congenital syphilis, which was an unfortunately common thing during this time and place in Southern America. There are other accounts, though, that believe Johnson's death was a little more complicated, with reports of him flirting with a married woman and subsequently being poisoned by the husband of the woman who offered him a drink. To this day, the music, life, and death of Robert Johnson is shrouded in mystery and holds a special place in blues culture. We may never know if Johnson did in fact make a deal with the devil for his guitar skills, but what we know for certain is that he was one of a kind, and his sorrowful yet seductive brand of musicality paved the way for a number of the most popular artists and genres still being listened to this day. And this leads us to Japan in the year 2005, where mangaka Akira Hiramoto was possessed by the siren song of Robert Johnson and created Me and the Devil Blues. For those of you familiar with the manga industry, you may already be scratching your head. Akira Hiramoto, isn't that the dude that made Chenless Again in Prison School, the comedy manga with all the boobs, butt, and fan service? And you would be correct. There's that very same Akira Hiramoto, and the whiplash you would receive trying to make sense of how these two projects came from the same brain would break your neck. Hiramoto's ability to pen these two manga, both of which are an absolute masterclass in their respective genres, speaks volumes about his talent as an artist and has easily made him one of the most versatile mangaka I've seen, period. Hiramoto clearly has an enormous amount of respect for Johnson, or at the very least, the legend that surrounds him, and the manga is made all the more special for it. As I opened with, manga is not known for respectful depictions of black bodies, but Hiramoto's designs and characterization of his black characters gives me hopes for the manga industry. None of the old standby blackface stereotypes are here. No massive lips, no charcoal color skin. Black people are not showcased as savages or idiots. We are simply allowed to be regular old human beings that exist in this manga. But what I appreciate even more is the nuance present in the designs of the black characters. Hiramoto didn't give in to stereotypical depictions of black representation, but he also did not simply design the black people in the manga as Aryan or Japanese looking characters with darker shades of skin. Hiramoto really paid attention to black hairstyles, noses, lips, bone structure to craft believable looking black people, and it's beautiful and refreshing to see. I haven't been this happy about black representation in Eastern stylized media since the Boondocks and Afro Samurai. Hiramoto did his homework not only on black anatomy, but the time period this manga takes place in as well. I can't express to you enough how it was reading this manga. I truly felt like I was transported back to this moment in time, racial tension and all. The world building in Me and the Devil Blues is a sight to behold, through a combination of the wispy line work, the beads of sweat often dripping down the characters' faces, the dilapidated churches, sundresses and overalls, manner of speech of the characters. All these factors line up to create a believable southern atmosphere in a world that feels like it really could have existed where this story is said to have taken place. This realism also sets up the perfect 1-2 punch for the element of this manga that makes it even more special, that being the supernatural horror. I never realized this genre existed before reading this manga, but Me and the Devil Blues is very much a southern gothic horror. In the very first page, our protagonist RJ is greeted at his door by the literal concept of evil. From that moment on, the atmosphere is set and you know this manga is about to go some wild and unexpected places that I was completely here for. I go into more detail about this concept in another video, studio, but Hiramoto's understanding of comedy and subversion of expectations make him a perfect candidate for grasping horror and how to keep an audience guessing. I appreciate Me and the Devil Blues as much for its mastery of horror, tension, and release as I do the representation of black men and women. The first volume of this manga is over 500 pages long, and I binged it in an evening because I could not get myself to put it down. There was something in every panel that kept me wanting to read on, and the occult element of RJ battling with his demonic possession and how this subsequently impacts him was engrossing as it was surprising at times. While those in the audience mileage may vary regarding their belief in the Christian concept of God and the devil, Hiramoto's storytelling prowess, coupled with the indecipherable nature of many of the details of Johnson's life and reality, makes for a bewitching cocktail of a story where picking out the real versus the fake becomes more difficult as each page turns. Me and the Devil Blues is something special. Robert Johnson lived an absolutely captivating life, and seeing the account of his deeds so beautifully rendered by a Japanese man decades after his death speaks to the legend and the universality of good art. You might have to sell your soul to the devil to find a physical copy of this project, but this manga has my highest recommendation. For those that like to listen more than read, I have a synopsis on the channel for you to check out as a supplement to the real thing. Thank you all so much for listening. Now go out and read Me and the Devil Blues.